Welcome to Attican Plays Railway Empire. All right, welcome back to part 2 of our application of the rapid expansion strategy to the gold rush scenario. And if you haven't seen part 1, I would encourage you to kind of stop and go back and watch that first, so this will make sense to you. But you can see at this point we've already finished off 4 of our tasks. We're in great shape. We haven't even finished our second year, and right now we're looking ahead to see what we got to do. And right now we're in grow Carson City and produce alcohol. That's the 2 that are coming up that are time critical that we need to jump on. So we're looking at Carson City and saying, okay, they've put a textile industry in Carson City, and by they I mean some private investor. And if you remember, we were in a quandary. We wanted to do that ourselves, but there wasn't a textile industry was really about the only choice, and we wanted to get that meat line going between Sacramento and Carson City, and that was expensive, so we had to just say, okay, well, never mind, we won't own that business, at least not yet. But so now since there's a new industry there, we want to make absolutely certain that it's supplied with cotton. That textile industry needs cotton, and we want to make the money on that shipment. But really more importantly, in this case, we need that satisfaction. We need that cotton to go to Carson City and keep that industry happy and help with the demand satisfaction and growth in Carson City. And here we're going to get a little cheap, and we're just going to borrow the line that is running between Shasta and Carson City, and we're going to tag onto it. I think probably if I was to do this one over, I would dedicate a line there. I would probably run a line. If I was going to do this one again, I would probably run a dedicated line for the cotton. But no matter, it works just fine. So we're going to set up our cotton line and make sure that Carson City has what it needs to keep growing. And, we've already got the wheat line coming in for the beer. We now have meat coming from Sacramento over to Carson City. And now it's a matter of figuring out which method do we want to use to get all those raw materials in there to make it keep growing, like logs and veggies and fruit and sugar and what have you. So now we're going back down to where we'd set up our pass-through warehouse between LA and San Diego, and I'm realizing that I kind of changed my mind halfway. I was going to set that up as a point-to-point or just a regular connection. I decided to throw the warehouse in the middle, and if you're going to use the warehouse, you really must have 2 lines in each of your cities available to improve your pass-through. If you're not using 2 lines in the cities, you will get bogged down, and you'll have big traffic jams at your point-to-point connection where you have a single platform. And if you had it on both ends, you'd really have a jam, and you really wouldn't have an efficient system. So I realized that on the San Diego end, I was using a single connection, so I changed that to a double. And unfortunately, my tiny little brain didn't quite wrap itself around the idea that there's 2 ends to this run, and need to fix both ends, but I'll eventually figure it out. So here you go. I fixed San Diego, and I'm going right back to trying to build my line. And then I look at it and say, well, in fact, it doesn't even dawn on me at first. I do one, duh. And now I'm going to do another one. And I go, wait a minute. I got the same problem here. I can only use the 1 track. So I finally punch in and say, I need to fix this. So now I'm going to go fix the LA side of this, expand the track so I have a couple of tracks to use, a couple of platforms, and make it into a 2-platform deal in the LA end as well, with the switches so that you can use either station. And now we can actually set up proper lines and have a proper pass-through warehouse. Now the good news is the one line I already set was using track 1 in LA, which is fine. So we're going to use track 1 again, only this time match it up with track 2 in San Diego. And I think of those as left, right, as I'm looking at them on the screen to help me keep track of what I'm doing. So this one will be right in LA and left in San Diego. And then the next one will be right in LA and right in San Diego. And that way I have a mixture of usage of the track. And as I said in the rapid expansion video, you can use any there's different patterns you could use to do this, but just make sure you evenly distribute your stuff. So now we've finished another task. We've finished off our gold. So we've moved enough gold from Shasta to San Francisco to fulfill that gold ship requirement. So now we're looking at Carson City because that's our other, that's our biggie. Carson City and alcohol are our two biggies right now. And we're getting ready to build or supply raw materials to Carson City. I contemplated putting a warehouse here, but I decided to treat this a little differently and do it as a kind of a, as I said, it's almost an oxymoron, the one city cluster. And here's where I realized I'd mentioned this in part 1. I goofed up right here. I've got those two stations facing each other. So fortunately, they're far enough apart I can expand that right one. But I can't actually use the tracks over there unless I jump over track. And you want to avoid that when you can. And really, just a general comment. When you find yourself in trying to do a scenario or a mission, and you start building a lot of track that has to jump over other track, you probably messed up. Now, some of it's inevitable. You have to do a little bit of it. But if you're doing it all the time and you say, oh, man, this is on the right side, I need to get to the left side. This is on the top, I need to get to the bottom. If you're doing that constantly, you might want to hit the restart button and rethink how you organize your track. Again, if it's excessive, a little bit, fine. A lot, nah, yeah, you've messed up. Okay, so now we're going to run logs directly into Carson City. And we're not worrying about the other 3 cities in this little grouping down here, Carson City, Shasta, Sacramento, and San Francisco. We are focusing on Carson City. It's our objective to get it to 100,000. Basically, in the scenario, it's meant to be a boom town because of the gold rush. So we're kind of duplicating that or replicating that here by having to grow it to 100,000 very quickly. Okay, now we're continuing with adding resources in. Now we're going to bring corn directly into Carson City, and we're going to expand our station and use a dedicated track for that corn line and get that first open platform. And again, we're going to just we're going to do logs, we're going to do corn, we're going to do veggies and sugar. And we've already got wheat, and we've got meat, and cotton, and they're making their own beer, and they're making their own textiles. So Carson City, once we get this and a couple more things lined up, will be in great shape to grow rapidly. And remember, if you're not familiar with this concept, city growth in Railway Empire is all about goods. It's all about having raw materials and manufactured goods in the city. As it grows, it needs more and more things, but the whole point is to get that growth. And when you need to get 100, 80, 100, 100, even 150 or 60 or whatever out of a city. The main thing is get these basic raw materials like logs, corn, wheat, sugar, fruit, milk, those kinds of things in there, and then get your manufactured goods. That's why it's great that even though we're not really building like a 2-city or 3-city cluster here, we're still getting the effect of that by shipping meat up from Sacramento. So you still got that meat beer thing going on between Sacramento and Carson City. And then Carson City, of course, is supplying its own beer and textiles, as I said, and we've got the cotton and the wheat and everything coming in there. So basically, we're just loading directly rather than using a warehouse. And there are a lot of times, I mean, I do a lot of videos on the warehouses. There are tons of times where you're better off without one, where you just need to get something done and you just do direct connections. Now, I keep going back to that textile industry because I want to buy it, because that's where I'm going to put the distillery to do my alcohol, because we've got a slot down there, and that weaving industry there, I finally bought it, and I'm checking out how much it's going to cost me to demolish it. So you take the demolish costs and then figure and how much it costs to build the new industry. Now, we're actually ahead of schedule here, because the distilleries aren't even available to us because none of our cities are big enough to demand alcohol. So as Carson City grows, then the distillery will become available to us, and that's at the point where we will go ahead and build our distillery. But we're going so fast here, we're actually ahead of schedule by a fair amount. But that's a good thing. That's exactly what we want to do. And so now we're going back down here to our little LA San Diego 2-city cluster, and we're going to run the cattle in to LA and let LA be the meat supplier for that cluster. Later on, you'll see what we do about the beer to make sure we have beer so that both of those cities, LA and San Diego, can grow. And we'll use our usual technique, expanding out to create a new line or a new platform, and hooking that platform up to our cattle run, and start to bring cattle into LA. Now here we see there's a connection bonus, and we know that we are going to eventually use that wheat to run down to LA and San Diego. So we're just going to do really the quickest little cheapest connection we could make. But I did orient the station the way I wanted it to serve LA and San Diego, because that's all part of the plan, is to run the wheat down to LA, San Diego from up there. That's the nearest source that you have if you want to grow that LA area. So we got our bonus. That's a good thing. And that particular little line there may be a throwaway, but just the same, it more than paid for itself with the bonus. now I'm trying to figure out how I want to get the veggies and sugar from over here on the coast up to Carson City. And after looking it over, remember what I said about jumping lines? Here's a case where, perhaps could have been a little better, but I'm going to run a line up here, and I want to get that sugar and veggies and move them to Carson City. And so I'm going to just hook them into the line that is running between Carson City and Shasta. So we're getting a lot of use out of that line, perhaps a little too much. It'll probably cause us a few delays once in a while. And I don't know why, but it was just really hard for me to place this station. I kept spinning it around trying to figure out what to do. And anyway, finally got it placed. So we're going to run a line around Shasta and then hook in right above Shasta to get to that line that goes up to Carson City. And we will run veggies and fruit, as I said, from here, or I'm sorry, sugar and fruit. Sorry. Let me try that one more time. Sugar and veggies, there we go, up to Carson City along this line. And now, of course, we're going to add veggies to that sugar line that runs up and eventually connects to the Shasta Carson City line. So now we're able to run veggies and sugar from down here or over here on the coast. And we're already running wheat and cotton and logs and corn. And so Carson City is becoming a fairly well-supplied city, which is exactly what we want, of course. That's the whole point of trying to grow the city. And these little tight lines here, I call this the Jan Jansen technique, but it allows the trains that are doing the veggies, because they're empty coming back, they can stack up in a short space, and it gets them off the main track and out of the way of the sugar trains that are wanting to come out of the station. So you don't end up in this deal where you don't need veggies right away. You got a delay on your veggies, but now your sugar can't ship because the track's blocked. So this way we don't have that problem. Or the sugar train can't get back to its station because the track's blocked. It wouldn't be blocked going out, but it would be blocked coming back. So this alleviates that problem. So thank you, Jan, for that helpful hint. So you can see we got 72% satisfaction in Carson City right now, and the two raw materials that we just set up haven't even gotten up there yet. So we're looking pretty good, pretty strong now for building Carson City. And again, I'll repeat myself, we still haven't set up any maintenance on anything. And I did realize here I forgot to put my interim signals in on this little section of the track. So these trains are kind of waiting on each other a little bit. That the second sugar train was waiting on the first sugar train to get all the way off that long section, and that's actually holding up these two veggie trains as well. So once I got those signals in there, now everybody can move. Okay, so now it's time to start putting goods into that warehouse, the pass-through warehouse that's between LA and San Diego. Remember, we set it up when we ran our lines, but we set them up on automatic and they're just hauling passengers and mail back and forth between LA and San Diego right now with an unnecessary stop in the warehouse. But they still work. I mean, they're still making us money. But I was too lazy to set them up skipping the warehouse and then have to come back later and do them again. So, it does that unnecessary stop. But anyway, what I decided to do here, I wasn't sure at this point if I was going to try to grow more down here like do Yuma and Tucson as I've done in the past, or do something else. But I wanted to keep this track from getting too crowded, because that area right through there where that milk industry is and the ocean coming up close to us gets very congested. So I wanted to run this log line that's going to the warehouse in a way that it wouldn't be up there crowding things up too much. So I'm actually going to run it through a platform in San Diego that just becomes a pass-through platform. So to make this work as a pass-through in that platform in San Diego, then of course we have to have the double track on both sides of it. And I could have here, if I'd known for sure which way I wanted to go in terms of city building, I could have made that a double track and used both tracks, one in each direction. Would have been even more efficient. But there's not a ton of volume. We're going to end up running logs and eventually milk from this direction up to the warehouse, from the south. And so it's no big deal that it has to go through that little strainer, if you will, at the in San Diego. But I could have run two tracks, and I also, of course, could have just gone around San Diego. It would have been just as easy. And again, this is a case of, I'm looking ahead to think I'm going to use Yuma and Tucson as my other two cities to grow. And here you can see Carson City growing. It's finally hit that 60,000 mark, looking good. And of course, we can't build a museum because it's got that gold warehouse in there and you can't delete it. But that's okay. So we're still waiting on our distillery. We're not quite there yet. There's 71% satisfaction in Carson City, so looking good. Shasta is also growing. We haven't even really done much with Shasta. Shasta's in a really good position to grow. It gets some stuff overland that you don't even have to supply it. And it's growing nicely. Sacramento's on the cusp of growing. And San Francisco, it seems like, is always the hardest of the four to grow in this one. And I think it's partially because that Wells Fargo Bank takes up your valuable slot where you can't have a museum. We set up logs to go into our warehouse in the LA San Diego cluster, and now we're going to come from the other side, from the north, and set up corn. And we're going to divide this one up as I've done before. We're going to have everything coming from the north to go into platform 1, and everything coming in from the south to go into platform 2, which we've already set up. And so to make that work, we're actually tracking both of these. We're going to put track in. We need to run that track 2 out because that way we can hook up to that supply tower, and then when we run track 1 out, we'll have a hookup to the supply tower. But we actually don't care about the track 2 coming from this direction because we don't want to use it. We actually want to use track 2 for the logs and milk and stuff coming from the south. Because we're trying to distribute the load in the warehouse. And as I've said before, there are multiple ways of distributing that load. So now I'm thinking about which way do I want to switch. So I want my switch to go, and then I want to set my directional signal. So the only way that people, any trains coming from the north, the only way they can go into the warehouse is into platform 1. So if we set a single crossover and then set our signals properly, then the only one they can go into is platform 1. And if you're not familiar with it, I've said this many times, but the platforms are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 coming out from the building. So in this case, our building is kind of on the top, and the first platform from there is number 1. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, top to bottom in this case. So we're looking at when can we switch over to the Dragon to run all of our freight lines and our city-to-city lines, because right now we're only running the Dragon for that LA line because we wanted to get the express, and that one that's kind of hilly between Sacramento and Carson City. And eventually we want to switch to the Dragon for all these lines except for our express lines, because it has higher tractive power and a little more speed. So it's just a better freight engine. So now we're going to plug into that corn line and run another raw material into our warehouse. So this one is sugar, and we'll be able to run sugar down to the warehouse easily, taking advantage of that line we already have, or we'd already created for the corn. So we're just basically extending out. We're running up to sugar, now we're extending out to, ran up to corn, now we're extending out to sugar, and we'll just keep going. And here again, we're using a very simple technique for balancing the two platforms in the warehouse. We're running every 3 lines from the north into platform 1, 3 lines from the south into platform 2. Now you haven't seen the third. Here comes the third line from the north. It'll be our fruit line coming into the warehouse, and we'll just hook it up, of course, to the existing sugar line. All right, so now we finally have the ability to uh, make alcohol. So we demolished that Taylor that we bought long ago in Sacramento, and it actually made us some money. By the way, it got overland shipments of cotton and made us some money, not a lot, but a little bit. And now we're going to replace it with a distillery. We're not going to wait for the city to grow because we want to finish this task early. Remember, to get your max score, you need to finish every task in approximately half the time that you've been given to do it. So we're going to run a fruit line directly into Sacramento, which will feed half of what that distillery needs, and we'll also run a sugar line directly into Sacramento, and now we'll have a distillery up and running and being effective. And the good news is it can ship its product off to Carson City, which will make money and will also help Carson City grow because it'll give it more demand satisfaction. Now we're adding the sugar direct connection into Sacramento, and there's a little concern there because I bought that industry. I didn't place it myself, so is it gonna get me? No, it doesn't. Good. We have enough room to get our line in there. There are times when you can buy an industry and it'll actually block you. And I've said this before, but the industries do not block you at all until you own them. So you want to think about, when am I going to purchase an industry versus expansion of your stations, because you can, if you happen to purchase an industry and it's in a bad location, it can block you from expanding stations or putting in a new station or whatever. And I've even had to resort to deleting them and rebuilding them, which is very expensive. but sometimes it has to be done if it's blocking your train lines. So here we're running sugar into Sacramento. And by the way, on this particular scenario, Sacramento is the place to put your distillery. You could do San Francisco as well, but Sacramento is just beautiful because it's got sugar and fruit, both very, very close. And so now we're going to expand whenever we can. We're going to wait and expand that distillery, and we'll keep expanding it until we feel like we've got this nailed. Because again, we need to finish all these tasks in half their allotted time to get a perfect score. And the other good thing, of course, about putting the distillery in Sacramento, I mean, you could put the distillery out, anywhere in some little city off to the side or whatever. But Sacramento's we're going to grow, and we can continue to expand. And it's got a customer. It's got a good customer up there in Carson City. I suspect by now it's got a good customer in Shasta as well, and eventually it'll have a customer in San Francisco. So it'll make good money for us as well as helping us meet our objective. And we'll get the shipping for it, the whole drill. So we're shipping the goods, we're manufacturing the product, we're selling it in our own city. Eventually, we're selling it in other cities. We're getting paid for the shipping. Life is good. Okay, so now I'm saying, you know what? We got some money coming in. Look how quickly we went after all that spending up to $1,000,000 again. So we have an engine. We got an economic engine going. It's time to build our big long line to Salt Lake City, because one of our optional tasks is to transport 2,000 passengers from Salt Lake City to San Francisco. So we're going to get on that quickly. And one of the reasons we're getting on this quickly is because we are moving so quickly through the scenario that if we don't start this pretty soon, we're just going to run out of time. We'll actually finish the scenario before we're able to do our thing here with Salt Lake City. Now, here's a case where I am jumping a couple of tracks, and as I said, it's inevitable that you'll do some. You just have to make sure you don't go crazy. And I've gotten lost. I've lost Salt Lake City. There it is. So I'm just laying out the track. You probably see me do this a lot. I don't know why, but I like to lay the track out up to the city I'm going to, kind of give me an idea of what it's going to cost me, because I don't want to hook up. You really don't want to build that station. Let's say I went ahead first and built the station in Salt Lake City, and then I started running my line, and I realized, well, I don't have enough money to get this done yet. And then something else popped up, and I wanted to, like, maybe a connection bonus to another city. And, I'd love to have that connection bonus. That's a city I wouldn't mind connecting to anyway. They're going to pay me for it. I'd love to have it. Well, I can't do it until this line is finished, because you can only have one unconnected city in your network. You have to connect it before you can open up a connection to another city. So it's a good practice to make sure that you have the funds to actually make the connection before you put the station in. Now, I don't always follow my own advice there, and I'm going to try to do better at that. But it really is good advice to make sure that you can afford your line before you put that target station down. So that's why you'll see me a lot of times running a line out and then just kind of stopping it right before the city, so I get a good estimate of the cost. And in a case like this, especially, this is a long line, and it could, if you don't do it right, it could cost you a couple $1 million in one direction. But you'll see here, we're going to get this thing down to, what is that, 847 it says. So 800,000 in one direction is pretty good for Salt Lake City. And one of the keys is we went around all the mountains. We didn't try to be heroes and blast through. We just went around everything. And we went kind of up that LA line, and then turned up to the well, really, it looks like it's the north, but we really turn to the east and headed for, or northeast, I guess it really is. So here's the idea. You set that line, then you figure out where your station's going to go. Now I've got enough money, I can finish my connection. Or do I? Oh, that's right. I decided, since I'd already done all that work, I actually built both sides of the connection first, because I know money's not going to be an issue. I open another bond, and now I can finish off that connection. And I've already built the second side as well, so now I can go ahead and finish this puppy off. So I'm going to set the directional signals on both ends, but you'll notice that what we do with the towers and the interim blocks is a little different than, again, I'm going to kind of beat a dead horse here, but I do not set a lot of interim signals. In this case, because it's super long line, I'm setting a lot of towers. So that's already 3. It goes through 1. That's 4, 5, 6. There's 6 towers. Now here, I think one more. 7 towers. Plus you've got the signals on each end and the stations. So you've got 7 times 2 is 14, 18 stops. So now we do our research and grab an express line, and we're going to run it from from Salt Lake City to San Francisco. Now the objective is not San Francisco to Salt Lake City, it's Salt Lake City to San Francisco. So we're going to run a passenger only line with our fast train, our express train, and we're going to run it, start everything up in Salt Lake City, and watch this, a dink, copy. I'm actually going to run 16 trains because it's an extremely long line, and I think that would offend some people because they think, oh gosh, you'll never have full trains. Well, newsflash, you will never have, rarely will you have full trains running passengers and mail. Very rare. And I think that's perfectly fine and realistic, because I just picture, obviously I'm not quite that old, I wasn't around in the 1800s, but I cannot picture a train pulling into a station in 1852 hauling 8 boxcars of passengers. 1, maybe 2 if they're hitting it out of the park, but not 8. So having a lot of trains running small loads is perfectly realistic in my opinion. So now we're upgrading our distillery. Again, we want to make sure we get that task done quickly. And you can see, look around the border, there's all those warning signals. Don't get shook up about those little exclamation mark ones. Typically for me, what that turns out to be are the ones that are loading. So I've oversupplied a city, or some raw material that I'm bringing into a city. I've got I've pumped everything in there. There's no demand for it, and we got to wait on demand. So I've got a lot of trains sitting waiting. Now, personally, I would much rather oversupply. In other words, I would rather have 3 trains running raw materials into a city where maybe 2 could possibly get the job done. I want to make sure I have enough trains to get the job done. And it's perfectly okay if they sit once in a while and aren't running, because they'll be ready as soon as I need them, as soon as we have demand again, as soon as we can ship more goods. I'll have the trains ready to go. Now, do I do a little overkill? Probably, but I would much rather be in an overkill situation than not have enough trains and then have my cities get undersupplied and have moments when they don't grow. So here we're setting up a quick line between San Francisco and Sacramento, because we never did. It would be the one most people, I think, would run off and do first. We haven't even done one yet. Main reason, meet to meet. But now they've got some other things going on, and they can help each other out. So we're getting express warnings because we're running freight on a lot of those that have actually gotten express ratings. We're going to lose those, and that's just too bad because we're hauling freight. So now it's finally time to deal with the wheat and beer situation in that LA San Diego two city cluster. We up until now we haven't had wheat coming down, and you'll notice I also, rather than just hooking up, the easy way would be to hook up to that existing line and come in from the north. But remember, we've already got 3 items coming in from the north. We only have 2 coming in from the south, so decided to spend a little more money on track and balance out my load a little better by having the wheat come in from the south along with the logs and milk rather than coming in from the north where we already have 3 items, as I said. So we're going to build a little more, slightly more expensive line, but that's okay. Right now, money is not our problem. We've got a solid economic engine running right now. Our thing now is time and just getting everything done. So we're going to run this down to the warehouse, and that'll give us wheat. And then, of course, where there's wheat, there can also be beer. So this wheat line is going to merge into the single side, and it won't have an opportunity to cross over. So it will go into the platform, but we need to. You saw me delete that one stop signal and move the stop back a little bit. That's because that one little section of track where the wheat line is coming in needs to be 2 directions so that the wheat can return when it comes out of the warehouse. And you saw that message, Carson City has now hit 90,000, which means we could go up there and put another industry in. And we're also close to our 100,000. It's only January of 1853, so we're 3 years into this, and we're already at 90,000 for Carson City. And I'd love to put an industry in there that we know we can supply. That's key. So taking a look at what else is out there, I mean, a clothing industry would be fine because you're kind of supplying your own stuff there. But at the same time, I believe there's a clothing industry in Shasta, and it would be a shame to not take the opportunity to ship off more of our textiles and have something else that would make money for us. So we're going to go with a sawmill, which is wood-based, and we know we've got wood right up there above us. It's going to be easy to keep that supplied, and there's no sawmill in either Shasta or Shasta or Sacramento, the two we're connected to. So it'll make money for us and be able to ship to those goods. And we're already up, 93.8, almost 94,000. So we're about to hit that big goal of the 100,000 in Carson City in January of 1853. So that's looking good there. And we're starting to get good, we've got good stuff coming into our warehouse, our setup down here in LA, San Diego. And we do have some corrections to make. And now I decide it's time to start doing maintenance. It's been long enough. So we're just going to go through and just spend money like it's going out of style to set up maintenance on all of our city stations and our warehouses. And the good news is we're making money like it's going out of style as well. So we can afford to do this. And I do advise, hold off on your maintenance until you can afford it. It's real tempting to do it right off the bat. And I intend to, if I keep going with this, another study I might do is, does it really, what happens when you set your maintenance early versus doing it like this where you wait? And what are the trade-offs? And that might be an interesting study, but I know that this works right here. Look how fast we've gone and how far ahead of schedule we are. And we're just now, 3 years in, and we're just now putting maintenance on our building. So we haven't maintained any of our trains at this point. And we've given them supplies, and we've let them repair themselves out in the field. Now, of course, the bad thing about this, you always get some random breakdowns, but the bad thing about not repairing them is that you get the breakdowns for back. You get more breakdowns, and it slows up some of your shipping. But at the same time, you actually have an advantage because it keeps the maintenance from occurring in your stations, which also holds everything up when all these things are getting maintained. So we will see right now that we've put all those maintenance sheds up, we will actually see a slowdown for, as I've said before, about a quarter. We will see a slowdown in our growth. All right, so we've reached the end of this recording, so this is where we're going to cut it off right on the verge of hitting 100,000 for Carson City. Actually, I think Carson City did hit 100,000, and yes, it did, and we are in great shape, and we will pick this up in part 3. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it'll help you become a better player, and I hope you'll join us for our next Railway Empire video. Thank you.